the Lord of Dreams, the devil himself, Superman charged with 15,000 years worth of solar energy. There are powerful characters all throughout the DC cosmos, but there is one entity above them all, the source of all creation. This British dude in a bowler cap. Meet the Presence. He's God. He's the creator of, well, everything. This enigmatic entity is one of the biggest mysteries in all of DC Comics, because not only has he only made a handful of appearances, but much of the lore surrounding him is complicated, vague, and oftentimes contradictory. You guys have been asking me for years to break down the Presence. And of course, good things come to those who wait. Hello and welcome to Comic Drake, where I talk about comic books and my name is Drake. Let's talk about it. But before getting too far into things, I need to give a big thank you to today's sponsor, Audible. Specifically, the Sandman Act 3. It's finally here, the next chapter of the audio adaptation of Neil Gaiman's masterpiece. James McAvoy returns to his role as Morpheus, the Lord of Dreams, along with other stellar cast members such as Kat Dennings, Kristen Schaal, and even Neil Gaiman himself. Dive deeper into the dreaming in Act 3, which follows Morpheus, the Lord of Dreams, on a grand journey to find his brother, Destruction. And in the end, he might just bring those destructive forces upon himself. This immersive 3D audio experience is available only on Audible, and you can listen to it right now. New members can try Audible for free for 30 days. Just go to audible.com/Drake or text Drake to 500-500 to get started. So enjoy and sweet dreams. But for now, it's time to get back to the video. For all intents and purposes, the Presence is the Abrahamic Judeo-Christian God. He would later come to represent an all-encompassing entity above all else that's divorced from any one religion, but come on. He rules over heaven, he created the angels Michael, Gabriel, and Samael, and he once took mortal form on Earth and was killed. The dude is just capital G God. DC Comics would use the concept of God in the 1940s in the series More Fun Comics, where he resurrected a cop that was killed by mobsters as the Spectre, the embodiment of divine justice. Yeah, nothing says More Fun Comics quite like Dead Cops and the Wrath of God. You know, for kids. In these early appearances, the Presence was simply known as the Voice, and was just that, a literal voice that guided the Spectre and told him what to do. And to be honest, that's really all there was to him at the time. The idea of God as an actual character interacting with the world of DC Comics and its characters was limited to the Spectre, and even then, he barely showed up. Basically, the Voice was kind of treated as just another god that's part of a superhero's mythos, sort of like how the Greek gods are handled in the Wonder Woman comics. Well, I mean, I guess you could point out that DC published a few literal Bible comics, but they're just illustrated versions of some of the stories within the book, and are meant to be taken a lot more seriously. I think we can all agree that nobody was trying to imply that these comics actually took place within the DC universe proper, and or were trying to create something like Bible Man.
Got any force?
Although we don't know for certain, one of the reasons why the Voice, or any other depiction of God, wasn't seen all that often is possibly because of the implementation of the Comics Code Authority in the 50s, the self-censoring committee that the comic industry set up after being threatened with government regulation since parents were blaming comics for juvenile delinquency. The code generally stuck to things like divorce shall not be treated humorously or represented as desirable, or no comic magazine should use the word horror or terror in its title. The only mention of religion was that ridicule or attack on any religious or racial group is never permissible. But look, even though people love to complain that everyone is so offended these days, go back to the 50s. Folks back then got offended by black children simply existing or going to school. I wouldn't blame any comic company for thinking that putting God in a comic book would get a bunch of folks trying to burn down their corporate offices. Instead, the DC multiverse would get its own creation story within the pages of Green Lantern, which flashed back to a brilliant scientist who built a machine in hopes of seeing the beginning of time. Surprisingly, the device worked exactly as expected, and what we see is a single hand spinning all of reality from the black nothingness. However, the mere act of observing the universe's creation from the outside triggered a massive explosion, the Big Bang. This hand imagery has persisted throughout DC history, and has even made appearances outside of the comics. But for years, this is all we knew about the formation of the multiverse. That is, until the arrival of the first crisis. Back in the old days of comics, continuity was an afterthought. All that mattered was churning out as many books as possible, as fast as possible. But as the medium grew, the content of these stories became more substantial. Long gone are the days of simple criminals robbing a bank being brought to justice in the matter of 5 pages without any long-lasting impact on the hero. Characters now had pathos, and the plot lines could go deeper and be told over the course of multiple issues. Now, don't get me wrong, plenty of these comics were still batshit insane and goofy as hell, but the medium was evolving, and DC started to care a whole lot more about their continuity and the overarching canon between each of their various titles. This would prove to be a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, the fans that read multiple books could enjoy seeing how all of these various comics came together as one large universe. But on the other end, the continuity was so convoluted that it could put off potential new readers. Not to mention that some of the canon was really inconsistent. And if you were one of those diehard superfans, then it's hard not to notice how all of the details just didn't add up sometimes. As a result, DC did something dramatic. They were going to hit the reset button and make everything cohesive, beginning with the definitive origin of the multiverse.
In the beginning, there was only one. A single black infinitude, so cold and dark for so very long that even the burning light was imperceptible. But the light grew, and the infinitude shuddered, and the darkness finally screamed, as much in pain as in relief. For in that instant, a multiverse was born. A multiverse of worlds vibrating and replicating, and a multiverse that should have been one became many.
This was the introduction to the legendary 1985 event, Crisis on Infinite Earths, which saw a being called the Anti-Monitor making its way across all of reality and destroying everything in his path. However, simply annihilating universe after universe wasn't enough. To destroy infinite worlds, the Anti-Monitor was going to need to go back to the source of it all. By traveling through time, the Anti-Monitor tried to become that primordial hand of creation, but he was stopped by the Spectre, who got really big and challenged him to an arm wrestling match to decide the fate of the multiverse. So now, when the scientist used his machine to look back upon the beginning of time, the resulting Big Bang changed history for good.
In the beginning, there were many. A multiversal infinitude, so cold and dark for so very long that even the burning light was imperceptible. But then the light grew, and the multiverse shuddered, and the darkness screamed as much in pain as in relief. For in that instant, a universe was born. A universe with mighty worlds orbiting burning suns. A universe reborn at the dawn of time. What had been many became one.
That's right, the multiverse was destroyed, and all the remaining pieces came together to form one new Earth. But how does all of this relate to God? Well, the Spectre kept appearing in comics, and as a result, the voice was still around and kicking as a part of his mythos. But it's during this time period that we would see the character of the voice evolve into the presence as we have now come to understand him today. In his groundbreaking time on Swamp Thing, Alan Moore introduced the concept of the Great Darkness. This all-encompassing void isn't a fallen angel or a beast of mass destruction. It is absolute nothingness, the complete absence of divine light. After centuries of slumber, the Great Darkness awoke and threatened to swallow all of creation. The Spectre was thrown like a rag doll. Some of the most powerful sorcerers on the planet died by simply looking into the mind of the darkness for too long. But when all seemed lost, the light extended a hand, uniting into the yin-yang symbol. There was something of an understanding between the two entities. The light and the dark still existed and were at odds with each other, but the conflict was significantly altered. This was a massive departure from the concept of the voice being presented as a higher power into something more abstract. Yet, despite this, plenty of writers wanted to fall back and depict the presence as the traditional Abrahamic God, such as when it was mentioned that he once walked the earth as Jesus. Yet, this idea was further expanded into the presence being an amalgamation of multiple heavenly figures, and that prophets like Zoroaster, Krishna, Rama, Abraham, Buddha, and Muhammad were all the presence taking mortal form upon earth. But that's not to say that the presence didn't take on a mortal body that was wholly original to the DC universe, because meet Wally the God Boy. All of this happened in the 1996 Supergirl series, where instead of being Superman's cousin from Krypton, this Supergirl from the comic is a pink shape-shifting goo creature made by an alternate universe Lex Luthor that fused with a dying teenager, which caused the two of them to become reborn as one being, who also happens to be an angel of fire that one time hooked up with a horse because comics. Look, that whole thing is bonkers and requires a video all of its own to explain. Or in the case of the horse, is a video that I already made. But because of Supergirl now being an angel, divinity was a theme that was played with a lot in this book. made most explicit with Wally, who for a while was just hanging around in the background of panels before walking on up and just saying, "Hi, I'm God." Wally claimed that he was a combination of multiple gods from throughout humanity's collective consciousness, but nobody believed him. Even though he hit a fireball out of the park with his baseball bat, knows about Supergirl's secret identity, knocks the shit out of her with his baseball bat when she questions his divinity, and then breaks the fourth wall by taking over his own bio in a DC handbook. But despite literally being God, Wally is surprisingly not really relevant to the comic, basically just serving as comic relief and to inform Supergirl that she's an angel. In fact, he leaves the book entirely early on by giving a monologue about the concept of omniscience and then teleporting away. This wouldn't be the only time, though, that we would see the presence used for comedic effect, such as this appearance in Lobo where he's kicking back and watching the main man wreck shop on his holy television. Not to mention this issue of Six Pack and Dog Welder, yes, Dog Welder, the dude that fights crime by welding dogs to people's faces, has the Spectre literally take a phone call from the presence to tell him that he and this other dude are tight, so he shouldn't be sentenced to eternal damnation. These are obviously comedy comics that don't really care about the continuity, so it's almost 100% likely that these books aren't canon. But on a more serious note, let's take a look at the iconic series that laid the groundwork for DC's cosmology for decades to come: the Sandman. In this landmark comic, we're shown all sorts of cosmic domains, such as heaven, hell, and limbo. It's also in this book that we meet Lucifer, the angel once known as Samael, who helped form all of creation. Lucifer is stated by Dream of the Endless to be the most powerful being in existence, second only to his creator. But really, that's all we heard him say on the subject of the presence. Lucifer, on the other hand, got his own spin-off series, which is one of the few times in all of DC history where the presence is actually shown on panel. And boy, howdy is it significant. Like this time where he literally holds all of creation in the palm of his hand. He even has tea with Lucifer on the edge of reality, where he offers to combine their essence into one new entity. But when his son declines, the presence leaves creation and passes along all the responsibilities of being God to his granddaughter. Other writers would try to add things to the lore of the presence, such as Sinner, his supposed architect before the angels were created, or Shienna, his female aspect that keeps his wrath in check. But these ideas never really stuck around in the world of DC Comics, even the ones that are based on real-world mythology. Basically, Neil Gaiman and Mike Carey did such a fantastic job of setting up their cosmos that few people wanted to touch it. Well, nobody except for the non-binary psychedelic sorcerer in the room. When it comes to influential comic book writers, there is one king that stands above the rest: Jack Kirby. Although he's most famous for his time at Marvel, where he collaborated with Stan Lee to create almost all of their most iconic characters, Jack was lured over to DC and given free reign to pen his magnum opus, The New Gods. This series was a cosmic space opera of epic proportions, detailing the never-ending war between the forces of Apocalypse and New Genesis. But at the center of it all was a force beyond comprehension.
In the beginning, the universe was void and without form. Great energies were born and just as quickly died as that which was formless struggled to find a form, and that which was without reason or meaning sought purpose. Out of this was born that which is eternal, that which is the all and beyond the all, the source for an eternity. This was the first world.
The source is what lies beyond reality, separated by a colossal wall at the edge of the multiverse. But its true nature has never been understood. Even when beings have been able to break past the source wall, they can't comprehend what they see. However, there was one mad lad that took it upon themselves to define the undefinable, Grant Morrison, and they presented a new creation story for all of reality. They detail that once, everything and nothing were one and the same, known as Monitor Mind, the overvoid. But suddenly, a flaw was discovered on its immaculate perfection. To prevent this flaw from spreading, the overvoid contained it within a bottle, and inside its cage, the flaw divided and multiplied, becoming the multiverse. In an interview, Grant Morrison explained, quote,
"It's the notion that the white page itself is a void, and in the context of the DC universe, well, that's God, or the source. In the white page, or the void, anything can happen. Everything is possible."
The source and the presence are sometimes presented as being one and the same, but just as aspects of each other. Much like how the Judeo-Christian God is broken up into the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They are three entities that are one. The death metal event explains that within the overvoid, there is a connective energy of justice, which is presented as the source, aka the presence. This is backed up by the time that Mr. Miracle went to heaven, and he said that he could feel the source beyond its gates. As for the overvoid though, let's turn it over to J.M. DeMatteis, who directly wrote the presence during his time on the Phantom Stranger series. He's also the one that depicted the presence as an almighty dog, and I love it. DeMatteis said, quote,
"Last answer. In my view, everything is an aspect of the presence. You may have a different answer, and that's just as valid."
And you know what? That is great, because I disagree entirely. For years, I have argued that the source, the presence, and the overvoid are all one and the same. But lately, I've been really coming around to the idea that the void is a separate entity entirely. Grant Morrison is a firm believer that everything is canon, and they love to weave ideas and concepts together from throughout all of DC's vast history. Yet at no point did they mention the source or the presence, or even show that iconic hand imagery in their telling of the DC Multiverse's creation story. Also, if these are one and the same, then how could the presence ditch all of reality and leave creation to his granddaughter? I mean, come on, that endless white expanse that he escapes to? Is that not just the overvoid?
It makes no damn sense. Compels me though.
The presence has also explained that nobody can be their own maker, himself included, that he's infinite and eternal, but was still shaped by external forces. When asked about this, the writer of Lucifer, Mike Carey, said that it's similar to the Sandman story, Dream of a Thousand Cats. For those that are not familiar, Dream of a Thousand Cats tells the story of how large cats were once the dominant species on Earth, and tiny little humans took care of them, but were also hunted down by their feline overlords. But when one human discovered that dreams shape reality, he encouraged the rest of his people to dream of a world where they were at the top of the food chain. And with that, the world changed into the one that we know today. With Carey evoking this particular story, it's pretty safe to say that the presence is what we have made him, an amalgamation of beliefs in a higher power. That he's a piece of the source that we have defined with our faith and belief. But at the same time, let's take a look back to the story of the overvoid. It was surprised to see the flaw drawn upon it. Well, what if that flaw is the hand of creation that we saw all the way back in that old school Green Lantern comic? Well, that's difficult. See, recent comics have revealed that within the overvoid, there are beings called hands, which are actually the ones that create the multiverses by using energy from the source. The hand that created what we now know as the mainstream DC Comics multiverse is named Perpetua, and we're shown that it's hers that is the hand of creation. But because she's the worst, Perpetua was captured and sealed within the source wall, with her multiverse being destroyed and born anew. It's through the comics and this official book about the DC multiverse that we know the hands are agents of the presence, the supreme being of the omniverse, but also that they're dispatched by the unseen hand of the source. That very same book would claim in its glossary, though, that the presence is the supreme being of the known multiverse, but possibly not the greater omniverse. And even then, Morrison once stated in an interview that Monitor Mind, God, and the source are all one and the same. And do you see why this video has been so hard to make? My personal headcanon is that Morrison's creation story shows the creation of the greater omniverse, and then that story about the angels creating reality is the result of the formation of the multiverse that came after Perpetua's. Again, that is pure speculation on my part. But regardless, it really does seem that the current continuity of DC Comics places the overvoid as the highest form of reality, with the presence / the source being the energies contained within. However, as J.M. DeMatteis said, you might have a different answer, and that is totally and equally valid. So please, do not take my interpretation as gospel. DC cosmology is extremely dense and oftentimes contradictory, but that's part of why I find it so fascinating. I don't know, maybe I just need to do a series of videos explaining the various parts and entities of the multiverse in each of their own dedicated explainer videos. Like, I could go into more detail about the Great Darkness, the Black Infinitude that existed before creation, which has actually been orchestrating some of the biggest evils behind the scenes of DC for decades. If you want to see something like that, then please let me know in the comments below. But anyway, I hope you learned at least a little something new, and hopefully, I'll see you next time.